perfectionism is fear wearing a really polished mask. And what I've also come to realize in years and years of doing this work is that essentially this perfectionism that we hold so dear leads to being performative. And that's something that a lot of white business owners do not want to be.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
What if I told you that your fear of doing harm is actually causing the exact harm you're trying to avoid? If you're new here, welcome to Represented Podcast. I'm Annie Gishu, and this conversation comes up from something that surfaced powerfully in a recent group coaching call inside my program Represented. One of my students said, I'm afraid of being performative. I'm scared of doing it wrong. So I end up doing nothing. If you've ever felt that way, this episode is for you. So when it comes to inclusion and racial equity, many of us hold back. And we hold this work differently from everything else we do. And if I'm being totally honest, I do too. Personally, I hold back. When I compare it with other things, like we don't hesitate to tweak a sales page. When it comes to updating our prices, that's something that we do fairly easily. And even when we're starting a new offer, we're excited about it and we are raring to go. But often when it comes to equity work, fear takes over. And I've been asking myself this question for a long, long time. Why is this? And I see it happening over and over with my students, with my one-to-one clients, fear getting in the way. And I've come to the conclusion that it is because the stakes feel so much higher and the consequences feel heavier too. Unlike a marketing mistake, getting this wrong feels really personal. It can touch on someone's identity, their belonging, and even their humanity. And that weight, that really, really heavy burden can make diversity work feel uniquely, and if I can use this word, threatening. Many coaches and online business owners find themselves walking on essentially eggshells, trying to perfect their language and curate optics that appear right before taking real action. And I remember when I was very new to this work, I was trying so hard not to get anything wrong and just trying to use the most acceptable language and to really put myself across in a way that didn't bring about any conflict, so to speak. But what I've come to realize is perfectionism is fear wearing a really polished mask. And what I've also come to realize in years and years of doing this work is that essentially this perfectionism that we hold so dear leads to being performative. And that's something that a lot of white business owners do not want to be. And I think all of us, that is something that we do not want to be. We do not want to be we don't want to be fake because you are not perfect, but you want to come across as polished. And so what happens is you end up putting on a performance. And the irony is that the fear of causing harm often leads to the lack of movement. And I use the word movement specifically instead of action. A lot of times we're told, okay, in order to see progress, in order to move forward, we actually need to take action. And sometimes for me, that word action, taking action, feels really big and overwhelming, especially when it's something to do with work that, again, that word might feel a little bit threatening. And so I choose to use the word movement because movement is a word that I associate with something good. It brings about ease when we move. Movement is good for your body, it helps you feel good. And so the lack of movement is a form of harm. So when we freeze, the status quo says, or rather, the status quo stays intact. Nothing shifts. So think about this. Every time you choose silence over discomfort, systems of inequity get another quiet ally. Just let that sink in because a lot of times we're like, we're just going to stay silent. It feels safer to do that than being uncomfortable and making a mistake and causing harm. But what we're not thinking about on the other side of things is that in this work of racial equity, what we've essentially done is allowed the other side to win. Systems of inequity get a quiet ally. And of course, it's not because you agree with these systems, but because fear stopped you from moving. Now, I've seen this many times in my work with coaches, as I mentioned, and they mean well. They care deeply. In fact, the kind of people who I am so fortunate to attract and work with are the big hearted business owners who are doing good. They're honestly one of the good ones. A lot of them are people who I see as coaches for myself with the different skill sets that they have because it just feels so aligned. But what happens is a lot of well-meaning business owners wait. They wait until they can have the perfect words, the perfect policies, the perfect understanding, and months later, nothing has changed. One of the things that I found really surprising when I started doing this work was that a lot of white folks thought that in order to do this work, or not thought, felt that in order to do this work, they needed to have done a little bit more work on their own, a little bit more study, reached a certain level before they can enter and come into this work. I don't know if that's the same way you feel about matters to do with anti-racism. You feel like I've got to do my homework, I've got to do something. And if I'm going to be in a community, in a group, or even studying this with somebody who's supporting me, I need to have done some work so that I don't come across as being ignorant, so that I'm not so green or naive, that I actually know something. And that's another barrier. That's another barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. So your fear of getting it wrong might actually be what's stopping people from being seen, heard, or served inside your business because you're not doing certain things, you're not saying certain things, you're just remaining in that state of comfort. And in so doing, it's stopping other things from happening within your business. And this fear doesn't appear out of nowhere. I truly believe it's shaped by what you've witnessed and what you've been told. For many, it comes from seeing others being canceled. Didn't we see that um, many years ago, 5 years ago, especially when cancel culture was really, really hot? And now it's kind of just carried on. And that online publicly shamed, attacked, and being labeled beyond repair. For others, I believe it's hearing that sitting in fear is a privilege. Wow. Like for me, as an educator in this space and as a Black woman, that's something I've always felt uncomfortable with. Because if you're somebody who is stepping into this work, of course there's going to be fear. And then to be told that fear is a privilege, you don't even know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that. And so it keeps you not moving. And for others, it's simply never having seen this work modeled in a way that feels safe, compassionate, or even sustainable. And I believe all those factors contribute to where fear comes from. So when you combine these messages, they create paralysis. We become too afraid to say the wrong thing. So we say nothing at all, too afraid to move. So we stand still. But as I tell my students, staying frozen doesn't protect you. It just keeps you comfortable. It keeps you disconnected from this work. And you don't realize that, but it does. And I want you to know that there's a difference between being thoughtful and being frozen. Because thoughtful action is grounded in awareness and even a sense of humility. Being frozen, not moving, not doing anything, is grounded in fear and perfectionism. And one of the most important things is to know where you are in your process, in your journey of racial equity. Where are you? At the start of my 10-week program Represented, I always tell participants awareness first, fixing later. You can't redesign your business if your inner framework hasn't shifted. No way. Because what will happen is you end up with the right words, the right messaging. It looks so good, it's captivating, it's bringing people in, but you end up with the wrong energy in the room because what you've written doesn't match up with what you're saying or how you're showing up. And so we start simple. Start with noticing. Write things down. Don't rush to change everything overnight. And I think that's one of the mistakes I saw happening 5 years ago when many online business owners were rushing to fix things in their business. And now a lot of those businesses haven't benefited from the impact of this work because what they did wasn't deep enough. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So, my friend, collect information. See the areas that need to be redesigned. Some of it might feel urgent. In fact, a lot of it might feel urgent, like it needs to be fixed yesterday. But hear me when I say this. Just note it down because there's inner work that needs to happen before we can go ahead and make outward changes. The inner work is the foundational work that prepares you for deeper And the key thing here is more sustainable change because you don't just want to do deep work and it's not sustainable. You want it to sustain, you want it to be there for years and years to come, right? And so I want to invite you to do something you probably haven't been asked to do before in this work of racial equity, and that is move forward with compassion. Compassion for yourself, because you don't have to choose between being careful and being courageous. You can be both. And I know this is a message that a lot of white women don't often receive. There's a lot of messaging around um, you need to know better, you need to do better, you ought to have this, that, and the other. And yes, there's a time and place for that. But I think with everything, we need a balanced message. We need a balanced way of bringing people into this work and helping this work be sustainable. And that's where self-compassion comes in. And let me be clear, self-compassion doesn't mean excusing harm. It means allowing yourself to be human while you learn to do better. Can I just say that again? Self-compassion doesn't mean excusing harm. It simply means allowing yourself to be human while you learn to do better. Psychologist Kristin Neff's research shows that when we extend compassion to ourselves, we are far more likely to take responsibility and try again. But what solidifies this even more is when we're in community with others doing this work, when you're surrounded by people who allow mistakes to happen. Because what then in turn happens is you can begin to loosen your grip on fear. You can bring questions. You may potentially feel a little bit embarrassed or ashamed to ask elsewhere, and know you'll still be held with care. That's why community matters so much. We've been created for community, not isolation. And when doing deep, important, heavy work like racial equity, we need the support of community to carry us through. So ask yourself, who's holding me as I learn? Do I have a space where I can practice without shame? If not, it's probably time to find one. You see, our goal is to create movement so we're no longer frozen. But movement only comes when we feel a sense of safety. If I fall, i.e., make a mistake, will I be held? Will my humanity be intact after that fall? Will I still have dignity? If you've been craving a space where you can be held with grace, compassion, and even love as you stumble through this work, because let me tell you, the racial equity streets are no catwalk. It's wobbly as hell. It's training wheels, it's knee pads, it's helmets, it's all the safety gear you can think of. But with the right community, you have a safe place to land. And that's what's currently happening inside my program Represented. I'd love you to check out all the details about this work and this community. Head to anigishuru.com/represented. And if it pulls at you, I'd love you to join the waitlist for the next round in April. You'll be able to find that link in the show notes. Now, if this episode has spoken to you directly, to where you are right now, feeling frozen, consider taking one small motion. I'm not going to say action, I'm going to say motion. Take note of what you see, what you hear, and potentially what you are avoiding. And your body's going to tell you. Your body is so good at giving you the cues. And I'm asking you to do this small, to take this one small motion, not so that you can have a project to fix something, but rather just to begin to notice. Because every act of noticing is an act of courage. And courage practiced consistently, my friend, is what turns this work from performance into integrity.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.